Okay, we're back. We're back in action, people. So we just spent a long time talking about table views and delegation, and how does a table view do what it's supposed to do if its job is to efficiently render lots and lots of cells. It needs to ask someone, us, our view controller here, or its delegate. It needs to ask its delegate certain pertinent questions in order for it to do what it's meant to do. And so it's going to ask us two primary questions. One is how many cells is it supposed to display? And two, what does each cell look like? How do we set up that construct? How do we put ourselves in a position to answer those questions for it? Well, we do a couple different things. We're going to add a word here, UI table view, data source. So we are basically saying that we will answer questions related to its data source, the table view's data source, and specifying this here. The UI table view data source is really a collection of functions that the table view can call from time to time when it needs to in order to do what it's supposed to do. So this is really like the UI table view data source defines a collection of questions related to the data that is supposed to be rendered in the table. The data source defines a list of questions the table view can ask its delegate or its data source to provide. So we're saying we are the table views, or we will answer these questions for a table view. And then we want to say self.tableview.data source equals self. So self.tableview, that is referencing our variable that we set up top. It has a property called data source that we are setting to ourselves. So two steps. We're saying by adding this up here, we are going to answer these questions on behalf of a table view. And then we're saying we're answering those questions on behalf of this particular table view. And the minute you do that, you're going to see a little warning pop up. And that's Xcode saying your to-do list view controller does not conform to the UI table view data source protocol. So it's basically saying it doesn't look like you're set up to answer these questions. And that's great. It's a little premature, but it's really nice that it's flagging that for us because we're actually not set up to answer them yet. We're not answering any questions. We've only written 2 lines of code saying we're answering questions for this particular table view. So let us set up a situation where we can answer those. I'm going to add a new mark statement here just because I want to group this section of methods together. Whoops. And I'm just going to call this the UI table view data source section. And provided that I have said that, this class conforms to the UI table view data source, I can start typing here. And I can start typing table view, which I know from experience is like the first word in a lot of these function names that that are in the data source protocol. And I can browse through them and select the ones that we want to answer. And some of these are optional. The table view doesn't need to ask them of anyone unless we want to provide certain functionality. Some of them are required though, and that's why Xcode is giving us a warning because it's basically saying you're not answering the required questions. And if you are going to say that you are a table view data source, there are a couple things that you must do. It's a contract. You're obligated to do it. So in this list here, I'm going to choose this guy, table view, number of rows in section. And that's basically the first question, right? How many items am I going to display? And you can also have multiple sections. So a table view could have one section with a couple of items in it and another section with a couple other items in it. For our intents and purposes, we're just going to have one section, and that number is provided by default. So we don't actually need to. There's another question we can answer, which is optional, which is the table view saying, how many sections am I going to render? But 1 is default, so we don't actually need to answer that. If we don't answer it, it will default to 1. So when it asks us this question, and we haven't said, oh, it's a multi-section table, we're really just saying how many items are in our list. And just as a placeholder, we could say, there are 5 items, just to, what's going on here? This is a delayed reaction. If we do product build that error will go away because it flagged that before we had actually written return 5. So this function is the table view saying how many items do I display, and we're basically returning a dummy value, which we're going to change very, very soon. But it's basically asking us to return an integer, a count, how many items. The other method, if we start typing table view, right, we're going to go for this one, cell for row at index path. And this is a verbose way of saying, what does each item look like? But in order to ask us, what does each item look like, it's going to have to tell us what item it is. So it's going to say, what does the item at index 0 look like, at index 1, at index 2? Because that gives us the opportunity to say, OK, at index 0, well, let me get the first item in our list, and I'll configure the cell. And then I'll give you, table view, I'll give you the cell. And the table view can display it. So I'm going to hit return here. And we're not going to return a dummy value from this. It's expecting us to return, as you can see here, a UI table view cell, just like this one expects a return type of int. So we need to actually be in a position to create and configure and return a table view cell. We could try to say return nil. That's like a placeholder. We don't really have an object yet, but it's going to complain about that. Actually, that's the wrong error. It's going to complain about that and say nil is incompatible with return type here. So it's basically saying this really demands that you return a cell. It's not going to fly trying to return a nil value. But you will notice that the error up top went away. It no longer says that we don't conform to this protocol because we have implemented the 2 required methods. How do you know they're required? If you option click on this guy, you can read about the role or the methods contained in the table view data source. And if you go to the implementation of this, let's see if we can access this here. That's going to be a little confusing. Why don't we open up Chrome? Let's type UI table view data source. And the protocol reference, or it's the list of methods in the protocol, it's going to be the first thing up here. And you'll see when you scroll down, here's the list of methods in this protocol. This is every method that was in that little autocomplete dropdown that we just selected our 2 methods from. 2 of them have the word required next to it. Table view cell for row at index path, we implemented, or we will implement. Table view number of rows in section, we also stubbed out and will implement. You'll notice, as I said, number of sections in table view, it's not marked as required. Let's see if it actually says the number of sections in table view, the default value is 1. So we know we don't need to actually respond to that. These guys, you can read the documentation on this, so on and so on. The point is just to illustrate 2 required methods. We're implementing them, which means that we no longer have a warning up here. But we do have a warning down here because we haven't actually provided any meaningful information from here yet. Let's pause. Sorry, let's pause. We're 9 minutes in. I think that's a good bite-sized piece. We're learning about how to basically answer questions for a table view in order to let it do its job. Let's pause, and we're going to wrap this up in the next one. And by wrap that up, I mean basically make our table view display some placeholder data. Cool.